Mrs. Crime, Mr. Wade, bringing you the stories. Stay tuned for a lot more. Today's unfortunate story is about a Cleveland torso murderer, also known as a Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run, was unidentified serial killer who was active in Cleveland, Ohio, United States in the 1930s. The killings were characterized by the dismemberment of the 13 known victims and the disposal of their remains in the improvised neighborhood of Kingsbury Run. Most victims came from an area east of Kingsbury Run called the Roaring Third, or Hobo Jungle, known for its bars, gambling dens, brothels, and vagrants. Despite an investigation of the murders, which at one time was led by famed lawman Elliot Ness, the murderer was never apprehended. The official number of murders attributed to the Cleveland torso murderer is 12, although recent research has shown there could have been as many as 20 or maybe more. The 12 known victims were killed between the year of 1935 and the year of 1938. Some investigators, including lead detective Peter Merlo, believe that there may have been 13 or more victims in the Cleveland, Youngstown, and Pittsburgh areas between the years of 1920s and the 1950s. Two strong candidates for addition to the official list are the unknown victim named the Lady of the Lake, found on September 5th, 1934, and Robert Robertson, found on July 22nd, the year of 1950. The torso murderer also beheaded and often dismembered their victims, occasionally severing the victim's torso in half or severing their appendages. In many cases, the cause of death were the decapitation of dismemberment of itself. Most of the male victims were castrated. Some victims showed evidence of chemical treatment being applied to their bodies, which caused the skin to become red, tough, and leathery. Many were found after a considerable period of time following their deaths, occasionally in excess of a year, in an era where forensic science was largely in its infancy. These factors further complicated identification, especially since the heads were often undiscovered. During the time of the official murders, Elliot Ness, leader of the Untouchables, was serving in Cleveland's public safety director, a position with authority over police department and ancillary services, including the fire department. Ness contributed to the arrest and interrogation of one of the prime suspects, Dr. Francis Sweeney, personally conducted raids into shanty towns and eventually burned them down. Ness' reasoning for doing so was to catalog fingerprints, to easily identify any new victims, and to get possible victims out of the area in an attempt to stop the murders. Most researchers consider there to be 12 victims, although some have counted as many as 20 or 40. Evidence suggests a woman dubbed the Lady of Lake could be included. There was a second victim who was also considered to be a victim of the torso murderer in the year 1950, named Robert Robertson, due to the fact that his head was also cut off in a manner very similar to the confirmed victims. Only 3 victims were positively identified. The other 10 were 6 John Does and 4 Jane Does. Exhumations of unidentified victims started in August, the year of 2024, after the County Medical Examiner Office partnered with a DNA Doe project to identify the victims through genetic genealogy. Some of the victims were Edward Andrassy, 29, was discovered on September 23rd, year 1935, in a gully on the base of Jackass Hill, where East 49th Street dead ends into Kingsbury Run. Andrassy's head was discovered buried near the rest of his body, which was found to be emasculated and only wearing socks. The autopsy report stated that Andrassy was decapitated in the mid-cervical region with a fracture of the mid-cervical vertebrae. The coroner also noted that he had rope burns around his wrist. The cause of death was decapitation, hemorrhage, and shock. He had been dead for 2 to 3 days. At one time, Andrassy had been an orderly in the psychiatric ward at Cleveland City Hospital. However, at the time of his death, he was unemployed and had no visible means of financial support. Florence Genevieve Polillo, age 44, was discovered at 2315 to 2325 East 20th Street in Cleveland. Florence was found dismembered and had been wrapped with paper and packed into half-bushel baskets, but her head was never discovered. The autopsy report stated that her cause of death was a slit throat. Due to the lack of the head, the coroner could not definitely rule her death a homicide. The 8th victim was located beneath the Lorraine Carnegie Bridge on June 6, year 1937, lying in a rotten burlap bag, along with a newspaper from June, year of 1936, was a partial skeleton of a woman who had been dead approximately 1 year. The body was decapitated and missing a rib. She was tentatively identified as 40-year-old prostitute Rose Wallace, who had vanished from the same bar Polillo had, but this could not be confirmed. Wallace was known to have disappeared 10 months earlier on August 21st, year 1936, while it was estimated that the victim had been dead for 1 year when found. Officially, the victim remains unidentified and is known as Jane Doe II. Lady of the Lake. The lower half of a woman's torso, thighs still attached but amputated at the knees, washed up on the shores of Lake Erie, just east of the lake, on September 5th, the year 1934. A subsequent search yielded only a few other body parts. The head was never found. She was nicknamed the Lady of the Lake. She had an abdominal scar from likely hysterectomy, which was common and made it more difficult to identify her. After she was found, several people reported seeing body parts in the water, including a group of fishermen who believed to have seen a head. The Lady of the Lake was found virtually in the same spot as Jane Doe. Both victims had on their skin a chemical which was believed to have been lime chloride. It is supposed that the killer meant to use a quickening lime to decompose the bodies quicker, but mistakenly used lime that would preserve the bodies instead. On December, in the year of 1938, the torso murderer allegedly sent a letter to Ness claiming that he had moved to California and killed a woman there and had buried the head in Los Angeles. In the letter, the killer referred to himself as DC, or Doctor of Chiropractic. An investigation uncovered animal bones. A decade later, this confession resulted in authorities considering the possibility that the torso murderer had some connection to the Black Dahlia case, in which the bisected remains of a 22-year-old Elizabeth Short were found in the unfinished Leimert Park housing development of Los Angeles on January 15th, year 1947. Both Short and the torso murderer victims had been thoroughly cleaned after death. and a butcher knife was believed to have been used in both cases. However, Short was not decapitated, as with a signature for Cleveland victims. Furthermore, the murder took place a near decade after the letter was received. Aside from circumstantial evidence and sheer speculation, there's nothing connecting Short to the Torso murderer. In the year of 1997, another theory postulated that there may have been no single Torso murderer, that the killings could have been committed by different people. This was based on an assumption that the autopsy results were inconclusive. Merlo believed that the Torso murderer could have been a transient who was riding the rails, as most of the murderers occurred near railroad tracks, and believed this was why there were murders in other states that were similar to the killings in Cleveland. Merlo went undercover as a hobo to investigate this idea.